Nobody told you the war had a price tag. Nobody sent you an invoice. But the number is there, quietly embedded in what you paid last week at the gas station, and in the grocery receipt sitting in your kitchen right now. I've spent years studying how economic shocks travel through systems. And what I've found, time and again, is that the real damage never arrives with a headline. It arrives quietly, in the form of a slightly higher number at checkout, then slightly higher again the next month. Here is the thesis that this video is built on. The financial cost of this conflict didn't stop at the borders where it began. It moved through pipelines, through cargo ships, through futures contracts, and it ended up in your budget. The supply chain that carried it, there is something almost no coverage has bothered to trace all the way back to you. Let's start with energy. When the conflict disrupted natural gas flows out of Eastern Europe, European buyers had to compete globally for liquefied natural gas, LNG. That competition drove up prices everywhere, not just in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America, in markets that had nothing to do with the political dispute at all. According to the International Energy Agency, global LNG spot prices in the first year of the disruption reached levels not seen in more than a decade. And here is what most people miss. The price you pay at the pump is not set locally. It is set globally. A refinery in Texas, in Rotterdam, in Singapore, they all buy crude on the same international market. When that market tightens, the cost moves everywhere simultaneously. So when a conflict thousands of miles away disrupts even 5% of global supply, the ripple reaches your commute. But the energy story is only half of it. The other half is food, and this one is even harder to see. Ukraine and Russia together accounted for roughly a third of global wheat exports before the conflict began, according to data from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. They also produced a significant share of the world's sunflower oil and corn. When those exports were interrupted by blockades, by damaged infrastructure, by sanctions affecting logistics, the global grain market had to recalibrate instantly. Here is where the supply chain becomes invisible to most people. The wheat that affects your bread price doesn't come directly from Ukraine. It comes from the substitution effect. When Ukrainian wheat disappears from the market, buyers in Egypt, in Turkey, in Southeast Asia bid more aggressively for wheat from the United States, from Canada, from Australia. That increased competition drives up prices in those producing countries. And those higher prices travel directly into the cost of every item in your grocery store that contains grain. And the bill that arrives late. That's the part almost nobody explains. Commodity price spikes don't translate immediately into shelf prices. They move through processing, through packaging, through distribution contracts that reset every quarter. So what happened in 2022 was still showing up in your grocery bill in 2023, and in some categories, into 2024. You were paying the tab long after the original shock. Now let's follow the money for a moment. While households absorbed these costs, something else was happening on the other side of the ledger. Major energy companies posted record profits in the period following the disruption. BP, Shell, ExxonMobil, their 2022 earnings were among the highest in their corporate histories, according to their own published financial results. The mechanism is straightforward. Their costs didn't rise proportionally to the price they charged. The margin expanded. You paid more. They earned more. The same pattern appeared in food. Several large agricultural commodity traders, companies that handle the movement of grain globally, reported significantly higher revenues during the same period. According to Reuters reporting on Cargill's financials, the company posted its highest ever profit in fiscal year 2022. These are not accusations. These are published numbers. The system was designed this way, and in periods of supply shock, it works exactly as designed, transferring cost to the consumer end of the chain while concentrating margin at the trading end. Think of it this way. Imagine you manage your household budget carefully. You track your grocery spending every week. And then, without warning, the cost of bread goes up 15%, cooking oil goes up 30%, and filling your tank costs $40 more per month. Nothing in your life changed. You didn't make different choices. The shock came from somewhere else entirely and landed in your kitchen. That is exactly what happened to millions of households over the past 2 years. And it happened in a specific sequence. First, the commodity markets moved. Then the processors adjusted. Then the retailers repriced. Then you paid. Now, what are the possible paths forward from here? For governments, there are 3 options with real trade-offs. They can absorb the cost through energy subsidies, which several European countries did, but that shifts the burden to future taxes and adds to sovereign debt. They can allow prices to adjust fully, which is painful for households but corrects faster. Or they can negotiate supply diversification aggressively, which reduces long-term exposure but takes years to build. None of these options is free. Each one has a cost that lands somewhere. For households, the reality is more immediate. Understanding where the price pressure is coming from is the first step toward making better decisions about it. Fixed-rate energy contracts, bulk purchasing of shelf-stable foods during price dips, and adjusting consumption away from the most disrupted categories, wheat, sunflower oil, certain proteins, are all documented strategies that analysts have pointed to. For you, specifically, if you're managing a family budget right now, this is an abstract. The question isn't whether the conflict affected your wallet. The data shows it did. The question is how long the lag continues, and whether you can position your household ahead of the next wave before it arrives. Based on current IEA and World Bank projections, energy markets are expected to remain more volatile than pre-2022 baselines for the foreseeable future. Grain markets have partially recovered, but structural disruptions to Black Sea export routes have not been fully resolved. The bill, in other words, is still arriving in installments. Here is what I want you to take from this. Somewhere between the geopolitical map and your kitchen table, there is a chain of mechanisms that nobody bothered to draw for you. I've tried to draw it today. A conflict begins. Supply routes close. Global commodity markets reprice. Processing and logistics absorb new costs. Retailers adjust. And you, at the end of the chain, receive a number, slightly higher than before, with no explanation attached. The corporations at each node of that chain did what corporations do. They protected their margins and passed the pressure forward. That's not a scandal. It's a structure. But understanding the structure is what gives you the ability to navigate it rather than simply absorb it. You already paid the first installment. The question worth asking, and I'd like to hear your answer in the comments, is this: when was the moment you first noticed the price of something ordinary had quietly changed, and what did you do about it?